All right, today I'll be demonstrating how to warp your loom. To begin with, you will need your loom set up. Mine is currently on a stand. If you do not have a stand for your loom, you may clamp it to a table or a countertop, whatever you have available. You'll need to set up your warping peg at the appropriate distance for your project. Today I'm doing a very short project for demonstration, but I find if you're doing something simple like a scarf, figure out the finished length for your scarf. And I like to measure from the front beam of the loom to my peg, add about 2 inches. So if I want a 60-inch scarf, I would measure from here, from the front beam to the warping peg, 62 inches. And then I have all of this space from the front beam to the back beam as my waste yarn. All right, so choose the yarn for your project. Today I'm using the 7.5 dent heddle, which comes with the Ashford Rigid Heddle Looms. You may notice I have a double heddle block here, and I'm placing it in the back heddle. That way it won't fall off while I'm warping. If I place it in the front and I hit it too hard, it's going to fall off. So I place it in the back. If you only have a single heddle block, some looms you could place a rubber band on your heddle to your apron rod, and that'll help hold your heddle in place. All right, so for our chosen reed of a 7.5 dent, we're using a DK weight yarn. This is a acrylic wool blend that I had in my stash. I'm going to choose the dark color first. And we're going to tie it onto our back apron bar. So I can zoom in here. I'm going to be doing a fairly small section. Just tie that on with a square knot. All right, so you can see we have our yarn tied on. I'm going to come around to the front. I'm going to decide where to start here. I'm going through the large slot. I'm going to pull a loop through. I'm going to wrap it around the peg. Don't worry about the holes in your heddle. We're only going through the slots. So here I have the yarn. I'm going to pull it under. And pull that loop through. So you have 2 threads in every slot as you're doing this process. Now the yarn is down here. I'll pull it up and over. If you have apron strings like these, right now I'm going over. Now my yarn's on top. I can place it on the other side of this apron string, and I can go around the bar. All right, so I have 14 slots warped. And now I'm going to change colors. Cut your yarn and just tie that to your apron bar. Now you can bring in your second color if you choose to use one. Just drop your cake onto the floor and tie on your new color. I'm going to thread 14 slots again, so I have the same amount on each side. Again, we go through the slot and pull that loop all the way back to our warping peg. And I lost count. 1, 2, 7. Halfway there. All right, we're going to cut that off and tie it. All right, for this next step, you can see we're at the warping peg. I'm going to take a scrap piece of yarn. I'm going to feed the yarn through this loop, and I'm just going to loosely tie to hold these strands together. I just tied it in a bow. All right, now you can hold it, take this off the peg. You'll want to be able to hold on to this to provide tension as we wind on to the back beam. All right, now that we're ready to wind onto the back beam, you're going to need some sort of warp separator. Your loom probably came with some cardboard strips that you could use as warp separator. So one thing I like to do is to get a roll of brown craft paper from my local dollar store, because they're about the perfect size for this 32-inch loom. And I just leave that roll hanging and wind on as much as I need. Another option, since I'm having a small warp here, I just have a selection of shelf paper that I'm going to use. So first I'm going to take my tied yarn off of the warping peg and let it hang. And take my shelf paper or your warp sticks. If you have warp sticks, you'll want to advance your beam until you get to where the yarn is winding on, and then place your warp separator. I'm going to slide mine in. Like this. Begin winding that on. I'm going to hold this with my right hand, and with my left hand I'm grabbing the yarn and pulling it tight. Now you're going to adjust with your tension knob. And just roll it on. If you're using paper like this, you may notice your paper is starting to slide to one side. Just give it a little tug. And keep tension on your other hand. See, my paper is sliding over. Just give that a little tug. Again, if you're using the warp separator sticks, every time you make one revolution of your beam, you're going to place another stick. This keeps your threads from overlapping and messing up your tension. You're going to keep winding on. Grab your front beam and use that kind of as a guide. You want to have plenty of yarn for tying on over here. So when I get to about the front beam, I'm going to stop. Now I'm going to find that yarn that we tied on and find the center. I'm going to untie that yarn. And if you created a knot like I just did, I'm going to cut that yarn off. Alright, now I have those loops. I'll slide my scissors through. I'm going to cut all those ends. And I'm going to let it hang. When you've gotten to this part, you're ready to finish slaying your reed. Alright, at this point you have your reed all warped and you're ready to thread your holes. Remember, we have 2 threads in every slot. One of those threads needs to go in the holes. Doesn't matter which side you start on. I always start on the right side, probably because I'm right-handed. I like to, again, keep my heddle in my back slot if you have a double heddle. That way I don't accidentally knock it off. I also like to grab from the back. Separate these 2 threads. You're going to need your threading hook. You're going to use the small end and place that through the hole and pull your yarn through. Now you can leave these hang down here. Personally, I like to take them and toss them over the side. It keeps them out of the way. Again, I'm going to reach from the back. You can watch, and if you have paper back here, it makes it really easy to see which thread comes next. And you have to be very careful when you're doing this because you can split your yarn with your threading hook. Again, reach from the back, grab your yarn through this hole, and pull it through. All right, now that I have a couple, you can see I've got holes and slots threaded. And now that I have several of those done, I'm going to tie just an overhand knot very loosely. I'm going to keep that here. For those of you that only have a single heddle block, if you accidentally knock your heddle off, that knot's going to catch it. And you won't lose all your progress. Ask me how I know that. Happens all the time. All right, now we're just going to continue slaying the reed.
Okay, now see here, I've done something wrong because I've got one in my slot and I've got two here, so I must have misthreaded somewhere. And there you can see I skipped a slot. So those ones that I messed up, I'll just pull back out. All right, now you may notice that in the beginning I started with a hole and at the end we're in a slot. Some people find that having one in a slot and one in a hole messes up their tension on their selvages. I have not personally found this to be an issue. Some people like to add an extra thread when they're warping so that they can begin on a slot and end on a slot, or start in a hole and end in a hole. That's personal preference. You may choose whichever works best for you. Just practice and see what method you like the best. Now that we're all warped up, I can untie these knots. I'm going to reach forward and grab my front beam, and I don't think I have quite enough length to tie on, so I'm going to loosen up my back so I have a little bit more slack. Slide the loom forward a little so you can watch this part. There's a couple different options for tying on. You can do a lashing on technique, we're just going to do a regular old-fashioned tie-on, which is what most beginners learn. I like to work in small bundles. Some people will tell you it doesn't matter. I'm going to grab 4 strands of the light color, 4 strands of the dark. So I'm starting roughly in the center of my weaving. And I'm going to have 4 on each side. So I have 4 threads in each hand. I'm going to go under that beam. Cross over. And do that twice. So it's like a surgeon's knot. Slide that forward and pull down tight. And it's not super tight, but it does have some tension on it. And we're going to do that on each side all the way across. Again, take your ends and cross them. 1, 2, and pull tight. Now, if you use a warping peg as opposed to a warping mill, some of your ends may be longer than others, just because you're going from outside down to a narrow peg. So those threads on the outside are going to be longer. That's okay. All right, now that we have those on, you can kind of test and see how even your tension is. What I like to do next is to tighten this back beam just a little. And that'll help take up some of the slack and even up your tension. Now you can feel in the back and in the front. See if you have anything super tight or super loose. Now we're going to finish tying these knots. Now if you're using an acrylic yarn, which has a lot of give to it, it's going to stretch a lot. So when you pull, you're going to really be able to pull up. And that can affect the tension when you're weaving. So you just have to be careful. See, because I tightened that back beam, I don't have to pull very hard on these to take up any slack. And now you've warped your loom. All right, now that we have our loom warped and ready to start weaving, first thing we want to do is advance this a little further to our front beam. Let me slide this forward so you can see that. So we're going to release the tension on the back. And we're going to begin advancing that forward. Now, personally, this is my personal preference. This is not a necessary step. But you have these knots here, and depending on how soon you start your weaving, these can create little bumps in your weaving while you are winding on. Now, I've never found it to be a problem. They usually come out when you wash your project, but I like to take a piece of the grippy shelf liner and place that on the front, and just adds a little bit of cushion to protect my finished product.
You have now warped your loom. Join us for part 3, where we will begin the weaving process, and I will show 3 easy beginning patterns that you can use on your Rigid Heddle loom. Thanks for watching.